With half of Gaza's 2.3 million population trapped in Rafah with nowhere to go, Palestinians have resorted to crowdfunding to try and escape. But with an obscure network operating the transfers out of Gaza, not every ticket out is quite as it seems. I'm Myriam, Francois, and this is The Stream.
Please, everyone, donate and share this video.
Because we had no choices but doing this.
If we can evacuate even one family, it would be something.
Because they destroyed my home and they want to invade Rafah soon.
Stop and give Masa Hamad a moment of your time. As you can see, he is not too far from his goal.
This is me, Samah, and this is Hamoud. Hamoud! Say hi. Hamoud, say hi. Hi.
We miss our peaceful life, our school and our friends. Please don't forget us and don't forget Gaza. Always call ceasefire now.
Today, we'll explore how Palestinians trapped in Gaza and their friends and family abroad are taking matters into their own hands to try and help their loved ones flee the hellscape. Meanwhile, cynical scammers are exploiting their misery for profit. Joining us today, Abeer Salim, a Palestinian journalist, Talid el-Sabawi, a Palestinian law and public health professor and researcher in the US, and Abeer Zayyad, a Palestinian attorney and volunteer with Operation Olive Branch. Welcome to you all. Thank you so much for being here. Abeer Salim, can I start by asking you, we've seen hundreds, if not thousands, of these GoFundMe crowdfunders pop up. Why is it a situation where Palestinians who want to evacuate are having to use these methods?
So at the beginning of the war, the GoFundMe was basically for people who wanted to restart their lives and who wanted to reconstruct their demolished house. But as the war is getting longer with no imminent end to the war being seen in the horizon, people started this GoFundMe campaigns so they can evacuate the Gaza Strip because, as you see, people are very worried about their lives, the lives of their children. And because it became kind of systematic, like people can pay to a specific agency and can get out of the Gaza Strip. This is why they started this GoFundMe, because they know if they pay, they can leave. And because it worked with some people who reached their goals, many people were encouraged to do this. It's the exact meaning of an individual salvation. But at the same time, it's not very practical to have thousands of GoFundMe links because with this large number of people, it's so hard for people to achieve their goals. But unfortunately, it's the only way available in front of these people to collect the funds.
Talid, you've been raising funds for friends and family in Gaza, but you've encountered some difficulties, haven't you, on that path? Can you tell us a little bit about your story?
Sure. So I actually started fundraising for others before my family. I am connected to a network of doctors and healthcare workers in Gaza, and I was helping some of the doctors that were going to stay behind, evacuate their families, particularly as doctors were being targeted. So, so I helped with those campaigns first, and then I began fundraising for my family. We've actually those of us in the diaspora have divided up branches of the family in our fundraising. I began fundraising for just to raise money for food because it's extremely expensive to provide just for food and essential necessities. And then as the invasion of Rafah became more imminent, and frankly, as the publicizing of the violent sexual assaults and other types of targeting against women, I think folks were just decided that they needed to evacuate for safety, especially as the international community has kind of failed to to get a ceasefire that actually is going to be enforceable. And so my first issues I encountered were with helping others with their GoFundMe, particularly related to evacuations. GoFundMe would ask when people were ready to pull out the money for very, very detailed evacuation information that I hadn't seen requested before, including not only names of the individuals being evacuated and copies of their passports, but also their exact location, the precise route of evacuation, travel coordinators that would be facilitating the evacuation, things that were kind of concerning for any organization to have. So initially it was with the issue was with GoFundMe when I was helping others. And so because I was alerted to this kind of information that was troubling that GoFundMe was requesting, started exploring other fundraising platforms. And I did locate one called Chuffed, which people have been hesitant to use because it's not as widely known, but their CEO reached out to me and said, look, we're willing to facilitate and help these Palestinian campaigns because GoFundMe has made it difficult for people to take the money out, and they're asking for burdensome and honestly risky information to give any private nonprofit.
Absolutely. Yeah, no, absolutely. And I want to get into some of the details of that shortly. But Abeer, before we go into that, have you got a sense of whether it's been particularly difficult for Palestinians to raise funds as opposed to any other communities that have had to try and raise funds in the past? Is this like a very specific thing that relates to Palestinians?
There are difficulties that relate just to it being about Palestinians. As the other panelists discussed, GoFundMe makes it really difficult for Palestinians to organize and collect upon their own campaigns, which opens them to be very vulnerable to being taken advantage of. But the other issue is the sheer overwhelming amount of Palestinians in Gaza that need support, and it's growing by the day. We're in the thousands of GoFundMes that are out there, and I believe that level of GoFundMes being out there is just overwhelming people. And also having to explain to people why GoFundMes can be $100,000 for a family of 10 or 12 people because of the cost of crossing the border being so expensive, which is something that has delayed sometimes with the campaigning.
Yeah. Well, as you say, fundraising money in Gaza isn't easy because most sites don't actually allow Palestinians in Gaza to create their own accounts. And this allows room for scammers to thrive. For example, May on Twitter says she trusted a woman in the US to set up her GoFundMe. And once the fundraiser reached $30,000, the woman disappeared. This is the last message she shared from her. Now, Abeer, just before we came on air, I was contacted by a man in Gaza who said that he'd raised $73,000 to evacuate his family, but that his contact in the Netherlands then only sent him through $11,500. And this is one of many stories that I've come across. You work with an organization who are trying to use social media to try and make supporting fundraisers more secure, easier. Can you tell us a little bit about the system that you use?
Sure. So Operation Olive Branch, or OOB, is a system that came up from seeing that there was a need to organize all of these GoFundMes into one place. So Operation Olive Branch accepts applications either from Palestinians directly in Gaza or their family members or representatives outside of Gaza. Once the application is received, we have a secure team that reviews the application and the information, validates it, and once it's vetted, if the application is approved, that person is put on the OOB master list. What's really great about OOB is once you make it to the master list, if you have specific things about your family that are very unique, it allows you to be put on more detailed lists, such as big reporters, anyone with medical needs, disabilities, anyone with pre or postnatal needs, which we have under our perinatal project, and the other section as well as rebuilding Gaza. So anyone that's not seeking to evacuate, but only seeking for assistance to rebuild what has been destroyed during the Israeli besiegement of Gaza. The process entails not only putting people on this list, but allowing them to engage with creators who will make content for them, who will spread their message, host lives to help fundraise. And honestly, what we've seen is that Palestinians in Gaza, first of all, they're under a humanitarian crisis that we have likely never seen before, at least not so publicized. And they're dealing with that stress on top of having to figure out how to evacuate or get food or baby formula to their families. So being able to relieve some of that stress and have people connect and make content for them and have them on this list where they're more advertised, I think that that's been a great relief to a lot of families. And we currently have more than 800 families on the list.
Well, we've been seeing lots of complaints around GoFundMe in relation to Gaza fundraisers. They've now created a page specifically dedicated to this, titled How to Fundraise to Evacuate Civilians from Gaza, with tips on how to avoid problems. I want to ask you to lead. Is this helpful? Have you seen this website? Do you think it's sort of helpful to avoid some of the pitfalls that you've encountered?
I think I hadn't seen it until your production team sent it to me. So that shows how accessible it was. I think part of the problem with GoFundMe is, and a lot of these platforms, is that they hide their policies, right? So they know at the offset, as soon as you create the fundraiser, what you're fundraising for. I mean, you list it, right? So they could have just as easily put that information once you select trying to evacuate from Gaza, right? Let people know this is the information that you're going to need to provide, and they don't. And so you kind of get blindsided, right? You fundraise the money, and then you're getting ready to pull it out, or you're finally getting somewhere, and then they send you the email like, oh, this is what you need to give us. And so it's very cloak and dagger. I'm glad to see that they created that page. I think that it is lacking some very key information, like they're asking for evacuation routes, and they're asking for the names of the travel coordinators and so forth. So they're definitely asking for more information than they're even putting on their page. And
it sounds like you might have security concerns even with handing over that information. Is that what I'm hearing?
Yeah, so in the United States, we have a piece of legislation called the Patriot Act that was enacted after September 11th, and it gives the U.S. government wide latitude to get information that is electronically kept and to monitor people in a sort of kangaroo court process that's behind the scenes that people don't know about. So the U.S. government very well could be accessing all of that information. It would not be unheard of, because they just need an excuse or a reason that it's for national security purposes. So we lost a lot of privacy protections after September 11th.
Abeer Salim, I want to bring you in. You recently had family members escape to Egypt thanks to a fundraiser that you yourself were behind. Can you tell us a little bit about the steps that you had to undertake to help your family?
It's one sister out of 9 siblings who managed to leave the Gaza Strip. Actually, she made the GoFundMe, but I was trying to secure like the campaign in order her not to get scammed. At the beginning, she had to find a friend somewhere in the US so he can get the funds. And then after she got the amount she needed for her and her husband, they had to send the money to the one who paid. And they waited for 1 month before leaving to Cairo. But I would say that if I was given the chance, I would really want to get every one of my family out, because the war is getting worse and worse and more violent. So it's not an easy process. It needs a lot of support from people around. It needs someone who would take the initiative to start the page and be responsible for all the details of it. It's not an easy thing, but as I said before, because it worked with one person, then people are encouraged to do it. But as far as I see from the links I receive from my friends who ask for the support, most of them have not reached 10% of the amount they are aiming at. And this is because it's overwhelming, the number of campaigns.
Yeah, and I mean, I presume that, I mean, Talid, do you find this adding to the dehumanization that Palestinians are going through, that there's like a sum placed on the evacuation, the safety of a Palestinian family? There's a literal price on the life of Palestinian families?
Yeah, I think it's really important for us to name and identify the fact that this is pretty unprecedented. You know, I'm not an international law expert. However, I've spoken to a number who have said, you know, this is pretty unprecedented where folks, especially women and children, are not permitted to evacuate from a quote unquote war zone, right? So it is pretty wild that we are actually forcing people to pay to leave, and I think that this goes back to before the war, right? The travel agencies that were set up in Egypt to allow for Palestinians to leave through the Rafah border are the same ones that are just continuing to do what they have always done. And there has been so this isn't like a wartime economy, a wartime thing that's developed. Palestinians have often had to pay to leave Gaza if they didn't have dual citizenship or a passport elsewhere. So this, again, just goes to the structural and institutional discrimination that Palestinians continue to face.
Abeer, I want to ask you, when people fundraise on these platforms, there might be people looking at these sums and thinking, you know, why are people having to fundraise 60,000, 100,000, like Abeer Salim just told us? These are large sums of money. Can you tell us why the amounts are so high and where the money needs to go to?
So the money is high, and we have to remember that a large part of that is just the fee to cross the border. Some of those fees are as high as 10 to 12 USD per person in the family. So if a family of 10 or 14 people are trying to leave, it adds up very quickly. And family members don't want to leave anyone behind. That's an awful thing to ask of anyone. But the other issue, and it's something that we don't discuss enough, is once these families make it to Egypt, they need housing, they need food. Some of them need medical care, surgery. All of these things are expensive, and it leads to a larger conversation that Palestinians in Gaza are going to need constant and continuous support while they're rebuilding their lives, which have been completely taken from them.
Now, to understand a little bit more about this process, I spoke with Professor Tim Kaldas, Deputy Director of the Tahrir Institute for Middle East Policy.
I think there should be a lot more scrutiny of this process, and also the Israeli side of this process, because that's the part we don't really hear much about. We only hear about the Egyptian side. And I mean, the Egyptians, you know, complicity in the siege on Gaza and the blockade even before that is you know, nothing new. But it's interesting in general that there is this dynamic in which the Israelis keep saying the Egyptians have full control over Rafah, and they decide what goes in and out. And the Egyptians, of course, say the opposite, that the Israelis must approve everything. And from everything I've heard, the Egyptian side of that story is largely correct. So I think the GoFundMe fundraisers to help individual Palestinian families escape this war zone are an understandable last-ditch effort in a wholesale abdication of responsibility on the part of global leaders. And is this a systematic solution to the problem? No. Do I begrudge anyone trying to help a family save its children? No. And frankly, the availability of alternative solutions that would actually direct humanitarian assistance to the broader population are foreclosed by the fact that the Israeli authorities consistently block humanitarian assistance from getting into the Gaza Strip.
Abeer Salim, I want to come to you on this. Any thoughts off the back of that?
According to the Geneva Convention, Article 35, people in the conflict zones have the right to leave the conflict zone if they want to. But what's happening in Gaza is something that we haven't seen before, that people in the conflict zone are being faced by a closed border, and the open border, it works according to lists that are published one night before. So it's not like everyone who wants to leave can leave. I know there is a discussion here that Egypt said they are against the displacement of Palestinians, and many other countries said the same thing. I understand that, but at the same time, I also understand the needs of the people who want to leave to protect their children. They should have the right to.
Now, scams come in many forms, and one is people using Palestinian images and stories to raise funds despite having no connection to them. Palestinian journalist Bayan said, "While I was trapped in my house waiting for death, some people found it a good opportunity to start a fundraiser under my name and steal money. Stop using our suffering." Abeer, I want to ask you about some of the scams that you have come across so far.
So if I may just interject something that just to respond to one of the panelists, if I just may, to the other Abeer. I want to highlight something that, I know we're talking about evacuating Palestinians and their GoFundMes, but the majority of Palestinians in Gaza, at least those that I have spoken to, make sure I understand they look at it as a temporary position in their life. They don't want to remain in Egypt or anywhere else. They want to go home. So I just want to remind anyone that's donating to these GoFundMes to help evacuate Palestinians specifically, it isn't for the purpose of displacing them or permanently removing them from Gaza. It's about letting them survive and be safe. Some of them need medical care. And once they are able to return and rebuild, inshallah, we'll let that happen.
And so to the question of the sort of scams that you've seen popping up, of course, we've seen people impersonating. We have seen some of the difficulties with, brokers. I mean, what kind of stuff have you come across?
So we've seen we've seen people faking GoFundMe accounts. They'll take pictures of Gaza, anything that's popped up in Telegram or the news, and make up a story. Some people will go ahead and copy a full GoFundMe account that's already established and change the link. So it's really important that people are checking the link on the social media accounts for the organizers and the beneficiaries, the families, versus just any social media page that might be popping up, because the link will be very telling as to whether or not it's a copy account.
Talid, I want to bring you in and ask you what measures you'd like to see brought in to try and make these methods of supporting Palestinians more secure, safer, and of course, more efficient.
Yes, I think it's also important. I know the topic is about scams, but I think it's important to highlight that most of these are not scams, right? There are scams, but the scams are not more likely to occur because they're Palestinians being fundraised for. The scams occur in all types of wartime economies, and so I think the protections in place is more that we'd like to see is less institutional discrimination, less structural discrimination, and this discrimination, it's important to highlight, may not be a facial policy by the organization that explicitly says we discriminate against Palestinians, but it could very well be that the policies that they have as applied are discriminating against Palestinians. And so by democratizing the platforms, making it so that people can create their own campaigns, deposit the monies in their own financial institutions, and increasing the ability to access payment platforms like PayPal, which has long had a discriminatory policy against Palestinians, where it prohibits Palestinians from opening up PayPal accounts. And when Israeli settlers in the West Bank, for example, can open up PayPal accounts, the Palestinian, living next door is prohibited from doing so. And not having access to these platforms then requires Palestinians to rely on outside sources.
Thank you, Abeer Salim, Talid, and Abeer. And did you enjoy the show? Let us know. Do you have a topic that you would like us to take on? This is also your show, so get in touch, use the hashtag or the handle AJStream, and we will investigate. Take care, and I'll see you soon.